A stone chapel in Axum, Ethiopia, holds a manuscript the world was never meant to read. Inside it, the Book of Enoch says something no ancient writer should have known. The moon is not only a light in the sky, it is an instrument, and when a human being takes their last breath, the moon takes a reading of them and records what it finds. Enoch even names what it is checking for. But the chapters describing this were cut from Scripture in 364, and the fullest version still sits behind glass no scholar has opened in 50 years. To understand what Enoch is claiming, you have to go to the strangest section of the book, the part almost nobody ever quotes. Most readers who know Enoch know the fallen angels, the Watchers, the giants born on Mount Hermon. That is chapters 6 through 16, and it gets all the attention. But chapters 72 through 82 are something else entirely. Scholars call this section the astronomical book, or the Book of the Luminaries. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation remains the standard English text, treated it as older than the rest of Enoch, possibly the oldest layer in the entire work. Fragments of it survive in Aramaic among the Dead Sea Scrolls, catalogued as 4Q 208 through 4Q 211, and they are so old and so technical that Joseph Millick, the scholar who edited them, called the material an astronomical manual rather than a religious vision. In these chapters, an angel named Uriel walks Enoch through the machinery of the sky. He shows him the gates the sun rises through, the paths of the winds, the order of the stars, and the exact behavior of the moon. And the way Uriel describes the moon is not the way a poet would. It is procedural. Chapter 73 says the moon receives its light in a precise measure, a fixed portion added to it and later taken away on a fixed schedule, as though the light were being weighed out and rationed. Chapter 78 goes further. It divides the moon into 14 parts and describes how, on each night of the month, a set fraction of its face is filled and then later emptied. Down to the exact day, the whole cycle resets and begins again. Enoch is not admiring the moon here. He is auditing it. He treats it like a mechanism with a job to do, and the job has a schedule that never varies by even a day. That word, measure, is the key to everything that follows. In the Jez text preserved at Axum, the term Uriel uses again and again for what the moon does is a word that means to apportion, to weigh out, to assign an exact amount. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who produced the 1983 Oxford translation directly from the Ethiopian manuscripts, noted that the same root sits behind the moon's monthly work and behind the weighing of a person's deeds later in the book. The moon does not simply shine, it measures. And in the logic of Enoch, anything that measures is also keeping a record of what it measured. Consider how precise this gets. Chapter 74 lays out the moon's course across a full cycle of years and matches it against the sun, tracking where the two fall out of step and by exactly how much. Chapter 79 has Uriel tell Enoch that he has now shown him the complete law of the luminaries, and that this law governs every year of the world, without a single day added or lost. This is not the sky of myth, where gods chase each other across the heavens on a whim. This is a closed system with fixed tolerances, and Enoch keeps returning to the word law. The moon obeys a law, follows a schedule, and answers to Uriel, who keeps its account. Millick, holding the oldest Aramaic fragments in his hands, said the material read less like prophecy and more like the working notes of an ancient observatory, a set of tables for predicting exactly where the moon would be and how full it would appear on any given night, years in advance. A text that can predict the moon that precisely is a text that treats the moon as a machine. And the question Enoch forces on you is simple. If the moon is a machine, what is it running, and what is the output? His answer, buried in the chapters that follow, is that the output is a record, and the thing being recorded is us. There is a reason this section survived in Aramaic at Qumran in more copies than almost any other part of Enoch. The community that hid those scrolls ran their entire religious calendar off it. They rejected the lunar calendar of the Jerusalem temple and followed a solar count of 364 days that they believed Uriel had dictated to Enoch himself, and they treated any deviation from it as a corruption of the cosmic order. To them, the astronomical chapters were not decoration. They were the operating manual for time itself, the schedule by which heaven kept its books. So when Enoch says the moon carries a reckoning written on its face, the people who preserved the text did not read that as a figure of speech. They read it as a plain statement about how the accounting of the world actually works, night by night, month by month, life by life. That is the frame to hold before going any further, because from here, the counting stops being about the calendar and starts being about the people underneath it, And Enoch is about to say so in plain words. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the moon's reckoning of the dead that the Council of Laodicea struck out of Enoch, the 7 marks the lunar gate is recorded as checking, the exact measure of light Uriel assigns to every single night, and the names of the scholars who were denied access to the Axum manuscript, along with the dates they were turned away. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. So what does the moon actually record? Enoch does not leave that vague. In chapter 41, he is lifted up and shown the secrets of the heavens, and among them he says he saw the chambers of the sun and the moon, and he was shown how the moon goes out and comes in, and he adds a line that translators have argued over for a century. He says the moon keeps a strict accounting, and that its going out and coming in is watched, because on the moon's face is written the reckoning of days. Days of what? The JS does not say days of the calendar, it says the days of the living. The moon, in Enoch's account, carries a running count tied not to the abstract calendar but to human lives underneath it. To feel how strange that is, hold it next to how the ancient world normally thought about the moon. Everyone measured months by it. Every ancient calendar bent around its cycle. But Enoch is not saying the moon marks the months. He is saying the moon carries the count of the living, that written across its surface is not a calendar of dates but a tally of who is still breathing beneath it. Chapter 47 describes a book, the Book of the Living, opened in the presence of God, and Enoch says the names of the holy are written in it and their prayers rise and are counted. Chapter 81 makes the connection explicit. Enoch is handed the heavenly tablets and told to read, and what he reads there is everything, all the deeds of all the generations of men, set down in advance and confirmed as they happen. The moon's running count and the heavenly ledger are the same accounting seen from 2 angles, one written in the sky, where it can be watched, one written on tablets where it cannot be reached. Enoch is also precise about where the count comes from. He says every life is issued a fixed number of days, written on the heavenly tablets before the person is born, and that these days cannot be added to or taken from, only spent. Chapter 81 has Uriel warn Enoch that his own days are numbered, and that he will be given 7 years to teach his children before he is taken, a specific allotment, counted out in advance. If every life arrives with a fixed measure of days already written, then dying is not the end of the count. It is the moment the count is closed and compared, the day the issued measure is set beside the spent measure to see whether they match, and whether the days that were spent well or wasted. The moon, holding the reckoning of days on its face, is the instrument that closes the account. This is where a second layer of the text opens up. In chapter 61, Enoch describes angels going out with long cords to measure. Verse 1 says they were given measuring cords and they flew, and Enoch asks Uriel why they carry them. The answer in verse 5 is one of the most unsettling sentences in the book. Uriel says the measures are to gather all who have been destroyed, and to restore the breath of those who were faithful, that they may be raised. The measuring cords are for the dead. The angels are measuring the dead in order to know who is to be raised. And the instrument overhead that keeps the measure, according to chapter 41, is the moon. Uriel's answer about the cords deserves to be read slowly, because it collapses the distance between astronomy and death. The angels are not measuring land. They are not surveying the earth. They are measuring the dead, gathering those who were destroyed, and restoring the breath of the faithful so they can be raised, and they do it with the same measuring language Uriel used for the moon only a few chapters earlier. In Enoch's world, there is one act of measuring, and it applies equally to the phases of the moon and to the souls of the dead, because both are being weighed against the same fixed law. The instrument that keeps the phases is the instrument that keeps the count of the risen. This is why the astronomical chapters and the resurrection chapters use the same vocabulary. They are describing one machine performing one function on 2 kinds of subject, the nights of the month and the lives of men. The phrase that ties this together is one Western editions almost always soften. In the GES manuscript, the word for what is preserved for the faithful dead is a construction that Dr. Isaac rendered as the reservoir of breath. Not wind in the weather sense, but breath, the breath of living things, held and stored and counted. That same phrase, the reservoir of breath, appears in the astronomical chapters describing what the moon holds, and it appears again in chapter 61 describing what is preserved for the righteous who have died. Same words, same construction? The moon that measures the nights and the vessel that holds the breath of the dead are described with the same language. In Enoch's account, they are the same system, and the storage is not casual. Chapter 22 describes the breath of the dead being separated into different places the moment it is collected, the faithful kept apart from the violent, the murdered kept apart from those who killed them, and the text is emphatic that these must never be allowed to mix. That separation requires a judgment. Something has to read each breath as it arrives and decide which chamber it belongs in, and it has to do it correctly, instantly, and without error, on the schedule that the dying keep. Enoch's whole cosmos runs on the idea that this reading is automatic and exact, as reliable as the moon returning to full on the appointed night. The same precision that fills the moon in 14 stages sorts the breath of the dead into its chambers. Nothing is left to chance, and nothing is left uncounted. Now, stay with the logic, because it is tighter than it first appears. Chapter 78 established that the moon fills and empties in 14 exact stages. Chapter 41 said the reckoning of days is written on its face. Chapter 61 said the breath of the dead is measured and stored. Put those together, and you get a claim that sounds insane until you read it slowly. At the moment a person dies, their breath leaves them, and Enoch says that breath is not simply gone, it is measured, it is weighed against a record, and the instrument that holds the record, the one thing in the sky that fills and empties on the exact rhythm of a human month, is the moon. The moon reads the breath of the dead against the account written on its own face. Sit with what that sentence actually claims. Not that the moon stands for death, and not that the moon reminds the living of their mortality, the way poets have used it for as long as there have been poets. Enoch is describing a function. At the exact moment the breath leaves the body, something reads it, measures it against a standing record, and files the result, and the object he identifies as carrying that record is the one thing overhead that has kept a perfect monthly count since the world began. He does not argue for this. He does not defend it. He states it the way a man states the reading off a gauge he has been taught to use, and then he moves on to describe, in unnerving detail, exactly what the gauge is looking for. Before we move on to the next passage, stop for a second. What you just heard about the moon reading the breath of the dead is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Ge'ez passage. The reservoir of breath, the reckoning of days. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. So what exactly is the reading checking for? This is the part the church could not tolerate, and it is the part the Ethiopian text preserves that the Western editions cut down. Enoch does not describe a vague spiritual judgment. He gives a list. Across chapters 41, 61, and 81, the moon's reckoning is described as checking 7 specific things, and they are named one after another in an order that never changes in the Ge'ez tradition. The first mark is the days. The reckoning begins by counting the exact number of days the person was given and the exact number they used, because in Enoch, every life is issued a fixed measure of days written on the heavenly tablets before birth. The moon checks the count first, the way an auditor checks the ledger balance before anything else. The second mark is the breath itself. Enoch's word here is the same reservoir of breath. The reading checks whether the breath leaving the body is the breath of one who lived in faithfulness or the breath of one who lived in violence. And the text says these two kinds of breath are stored in separate places and must never be mixed. The third mark is the deeds, written and unwritten. Chapter 81 says Enoch was shown the tablets of heaven and read on them everything that the children of men would do, all of it recorded before it happened and confirmed after. The moon's reckoning compares the life that was lived against the life that was written, line by line. The fourth mark is the blood. This is the mark the church found most disturbing, because Enoch says the reckoning checks whether innocent blood is on the account, and that spilled blood cries out from the ground and is entered against the name of whoever spilled it, a claim that ties directly back to chapter 22, where the blood of Abel is described as still crying out and still recorded long after his death. The fifth mark is the oaths. Enoch is obsessed with oaths, the sworn word that holds creation together. Chapter 69 describes a secret oath sworn before the world was made, the oath that keeps the heavens in their courses and the sea within its bounds. The moon's reckoning checks whether the dead kept their sworn word or broke it, because in Enoch a broken oath is a crack in the order of the world itself. The sixth mark is the light. Enoch's cosmology divides everyone into those who walked in light and those who walked in darkness, and this is not a metaphor to him. He says the righteous shine, that their names are written among the stars, and chapter 43 explicitly identifies certain stars with the names of the holy ones. The reading checks how much light the person carried, measured, he says, the way the moon's own light is measured, in exact portions. The seventh mark is the name. This is the final check and the most permanent one. Enoch says every person has a name written in the book of the living, and the reckoning determines whether that name remains written or is blotted out. Chapter 108, the very last chapter of the book, describes the names of the righteous being read aloud and preserved, and the names of the corrupt being erased from the record so completely that it is as if they never were. The name is checked last because the name is what survives the reading, or does not. 7 marks: the days, the breath, the deeds, the blood, the oaths, the light, and the name. Enoch lays them out like the columns of an intake form, and he says the moon runs through them at the moment of death, in that order, and records the result on the tablets that no human hand can alter. Here is the detail that should stop you cold. Enoch says this reading happens at night. Chapter 22 describes the hollow places where the souls of the dead are gathered and separated. 4 chambers, the righteous kept apart from the wicked, the murdered kept apart from their murderers, each group held in its own place, awaiting the great judgment. And the sorting into those chambers, the text implies, follows the reading. The moon takes its measure, and the breath is sent to the chamber the measure assigns. The reason the church placed the abyss below the earth and the judgment at the end of time was partly to move this moment safely out of reach. Enoch put it directly overhead, every night, on a schedule anyone could watch. And Enoch is not alone in placing the reckoning of the dead in the hands of the moon. This is where the older traditions around him line up in a way that is hard to dismiss as coincidence. Long before Enoch was written, the civilization of Mesopotamia worshipped a moon god named Sin, called Nana in the older Sumerian, whose great temple stood at Ur. Sin was not a minor deity, he was the divine accountant of the heavens. The Mesopotamians called him the one who determines destinies, and his monthly cycle was understood as a literal reckoning. On the days of the moon's disappearance, the last days of the month when the moon goes dark, the Babylonians believed Sin descended to the underworld to judge the dead and to settle the accounts of the month. The Omen series, known as the Enuma Anu Enlil, the great Babylonian catalogue of celestial signs, treats the moon's exact appearance, its horns, its halo, the day of its arrival, as a running verdict on the fate of kings and nations. The moon in Babylon was a face that read the world and pronounced on it, on a fixed schedule, exactly as Enoch describes. Egypt drew the same connection from a different direction. The Egyptian god of the moon was Thoth, and Thoth was the scribe of the gods, the keeper of the divine records, the one who wrote down the result of the judgment of the dead. In the weighing of the heart, described in spell 125 of the Book of the Dead, the heart of the deceased is placed on a scale against the feather of Ma'at, the feather of truth, and the moon god Thoth stands beside the scale with his reed pen, recording the reading. The Egyptians did not separate the moon from the judgment of the dead. They made the moon god the official who writes the verdict down. And the other Egyptian lunar god, Khonsu, whose name means the traveler, was believed to cross the night sky counting and measuring, a wanderer who kept the reckoning of time and of lives. The parallel to Enoch's auditing moon is exact. 2 separate traditions, Mesopotamian and Egyptian, older than Enoch, both place the reckoning of the human dead in the hands of the moon, one as judge, one as scribe. Enoch inherits both roles and fuses them. His moon is the judge that reads, and the scribe that records, the instrument of Sin and the pen of Thoth in a single object hung in the sky. And the Hebrew scriptures that the church did carry the fingerprints of the same idea, even after it was sanded down. Malachi 3:16 speaks of a book of remembrance written before the Lord for those who feared him, an account kept of the faithful by name. Daniel 7:10 describes the court of heaven being seated and the books being opened before the Ancient of Days. Jude 1:14 quotes Enoch directly, by name, as a prophet, treating the book as authoritative even as the wider church was moving to bury it. The idea of a reading, a record, and a name that survives or is blotted out did not vanish from the Bible. It was scattered and softened. In Enoch, it is concentrated and named, and the instrument that performs the reading is identified without apology. It is the moon. So, why was this cut? The suppression is documented, and it follows the same pattern every time Enoch says something too specific. The Council of Laodicea in the year 364 removed Enoch from the canon and named it dangerous. The general reason given was its detail about fallen angels. But the council's own concern, preserved in its canons, was texts that assigned heavenly functions to created things and named the places and mechanisms of judgment. A moon that reads the dead is exactly that. It takes a function the church reserved for God alone and hands it to an object in the sky that anyone can see. That was intolerable. The church's cosmology needed the judgment to be invisible, spiritual, and far away. Enoch made it mechanical, scheduled, and overhead. Jerome, assembling the Latin Vulgate around the year 400, dismissed Enoch's astronomical chapters as confused speculation unworthy of study, and he did it without ever addressing how the text knew what it knew. Augustine, in The City of God around 410, argued that Enoch's descriptions of the luminaries as reckoning instruments were borrowed from pagan star worship, which was half true, because the Babylonian and Egyptian parallels are real, but that admission cut against him, because it meant three separate ancient traditions independently placed the reckoning of the dead in the moon, when R.H. Charles produced the English translation in 1906 that most people still quote. He rendered the measuring language of the astronomical chapters in vague, poetic terms, treating the moon's precise accounting as primitive calendar mythology. Dr. Isaac, working from the Ethiopian text 70 years later, showed that Charles had smoothed out exactly the passages where the moon's function was most concrete. The auditing moon became, in the standard English Enoch, a quaint description of lunar phases. The reckoning was translated away, and the fullest version is still not fully readable. Access to the Axum manuscripts was restricted after 1974, when the Ethiopian Revolution reclassified church archives as protected national property. Dr. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, one of the foremost living authorities on Enoch, applied for direct access to examine the astronomical chapters and was denied. He applied again years later and was denied again. In an interview with Biblical Archaeology Review, he stated that several passages in the J.Ez tradition are known to scholars only through secondary references and have not been available for direct examination in over half a century. The chapters describing what the moon checks for are among them. The most complete account of the reading is sealed in a building most researchers will never be permitted to enter. Now, here is where the ancient claim brushes against something modern, and I want to be careful. I'm not telling you the moon is a conscious judge scanning your soul when you die. The Book of Enoch is not a medical instrument. But the claim underneath the imagery that the moon's cycle is tied to the timing of human death is not as absurd as it sounds. Researchers have spent decades studying whether the lunar cycle correlates with mortality, with the timing of births, with cardiovascular events, with the rhythms of sleep, and the body's internal clock. The findings are contested and far from settled, but the question refuses to die, because the human body does run on cycles, measured in the same 29.5 days the moon takes to fill and empty. Enoch's monthly reckoning and the monthly rhythm buried in human biology are counting to the same number. He had no way to measure that. He wrote it down anyway. It is the kind of coincidence that grows less comfortable the longer you sit with it. Another case of Enoch naming a figure the instruments would only reach much later. The manuscripts remain in Axum, behind stone and government restriction. The Aramaic fragments of the astronomical chapters sit under glass in Jerusalem, catalogued as 4Q 208 through 4Q 211, older than the Roman Empire, still saying what they have always said. The Babylonian omen tablets that made the moon a judge are in the British Museum. The Egyptian scenes of Thoth recording the weighing of the heart are painted on tomb walls up and down the Nile. 3 traditions, 1 claim. And in a book the church removed from the Bible 17 centuries ago, a man named Enoch stands beside an angel, watches the moon fill and empty in its 14 exact stages, and writes down what it is measuring: the days, the breath, the deeds, the blood, the oaths, the light, and the name. He records it the way you would record the readings off an instrument, without flinching, as though he expected someone, someday, to check his work. The moon is still overhead. It still fills and empties on the same schedule it did when he wrote. And if Enoch was right about even part of what he saw, then it is still, night after night, taking its reading and still checking for the 7 things he named.